Hello Internet, welcome to another episode of Romney's Reviews. This review comes to you in two parts because I reviewed two movies this week. So, the first movie that's on the chopping block is The Odd Life of Timothy Green. For the thoughts on The Odd Life of Timothy Green, I'm going to turn the time over to Romney of the Past. Hello again, this is Romney of the Past. I just got back from watching The Odd Life of Timothy Green, and, well, kind of a funny story. This whole day started out kind of badly. I mean, when I go out to the theater, my back tire breaks, so I have to bring it all the way back to the house, lock it up, leave all my bike stuff here. I go and I figure, well, since I'm not going to have enough time to be on time for the movie, I'll just go work out. So I go work out at the college gym. I'm riding the bus, and I realize, crap, I'm not going to be on time for this movie and be able to get lunch, so I'll just have to skip lunch and go see the movie. And then I get to the theater, I pay for the ticket, I sit in the theater, then I realize, after a good 10 minutes or so, I'm sitting in the wrong theater. Because I figured, this movie should have started by now. So I go outside and I check, oh wait, I'm in the wrong theater. The theater I'm supposed to be in is that way. So when I got into the theater, I missed a good 10 minutes of the film, so if there was some key pivotal stuff in the beginning that set a whole bunch of stuff up, I didn't really see it, but then again, I didn't really miss all that much, so I don't think it hurt me all that much. This is the same thing that happened to me when I went to watch Prometheus. So yeah, I pretty much saw a good majority of the film, so I feel like I can still give this film a fair review. So yeah, best way I can describe this film, imagine if they took a Disney Channel movie, combined it with a Hallmark movie, and then gave it a much larger budget. And now imagine, if you will, that instead of using that budget on stuff like CGI or big name actors, they decided to hire a better writing team instead. That's essentially what you would get. Now, the story of this film, the thing that surprised me is that its focus was, well, more on the parents rather than the kid. Because I know most studios, when they get this sort of story idea, they would probably put the focus a lot on the magical boy that appeared out of nowhere and his adventures. But this focus is more on the parents that essentially wished for him, and kind of how they're having to deal with the sudden responsibilities of being a parent. I mean, it's not like they got the kid as a baby, they got him as a 10-year-old with all the traits that they put into the box, and so with all those traits, they figured it's basically the story is about the parents, and that's something I kind of liked. And there are some times where things were a little ambiguous, which worked for the most part, because we know kind of what the parents know, but one problem that I had with it is that there were certain scenes with it that they kind of kept shifting focus between the boy and the parents instead of keeping it on one or the other. And so there are scenes that we see that if we were to focus solely on the parents for the whole film, it gives us information that the parents wouldn't even know about. At least not even by the end. And it doesn't really do a good job. And it's not even scenes that inform the audience about something that the parents don't know. It's just fluff, pretty much. And so that was the one detraction with the story that I saw. So overall, the story, it's really good. It does have its flaws, but it's not as flawed as other films that I've seen this summer. That said, I really think Disney made a mistake by trying to release this at the end of the summer movie season. If they released this film, furthermore in the autumn, around September, or preferably more around Thanksgiving, it probably would have been a smarter marketing choice. This film is a family film. It's kind of one of those feel-good, almost diabetes-inducing family films, and those are the kind of films you usually see during the holiday season, because that's the type of season where pretty much an entire family goes to the movies. Whereas the summer, the best way to describe that season is where you and your buddies are going to see movies instead of you and your whole family, unless you're 5 or 6. So yeah, good story. Disney should have really released this during the fall or holiday seasons. It would have been a lot better that way, in my opinion. But overall, the film is still pretty good. Now, from a technical standpoint, it's kind of interesting because it doesn't try to show off the fact that it has a larger budget, but it also kind of tries to keep things sort of best way to describe it doesn't try to make it like a mock indie film, but it doesn't try to rub it in your face that they have a high budget. They kind of find a nice balance as, hey, this is just a film. It's basically, for example, with the Hallmark Disney Channel example stuff, the cinematography is a step above that, but they don't, it's kind of like they do really creative things with the shots, but they don't let it get to their head that they can do that. They kind of keep, it's kind of a very safe sort of type of shots, but they also do some pretty unique stuff. I mean, there are some like huge vistas and stuff, but it's not like a huge like Lord of the Rings type of vista, the whole do sort of thing, but they do have some pretty nice wide shots, some pretty nice like radial dollies, and some, basically the cinematography is pretty good, but it kind of keeps itself fairly level-headed. Now the music is where you really get the Hallmark feel, because you can tell the composer is really trying their best, but the film itself doesn't give them a lot of stuff to work with, because there's no like, for a family film, there's no like major Field of Dreams moment or major sports movie moment, and there's not as many like huge vistas, and it doesn't have the sort of Back to the Future type thing where you can really go big with the score. So the score is kind of kept fairly small. It's kind of small and sweet, but the composer's really kind of giving it their all. It's kind of like a case of you don't need to put so much enthusiasm into it, but they do it anyway. That's the one thing that I could kind of guess with the music. Now, the writing was pretty good, because it kind of has this sort of framing device where the parents are talking to these, like, what I'm assuming are lawyers, and it's revealed at the end what they are, so I'm not going to say what, but... And so it's kind of has this sort of storybook feel to it, at least from where I was watching. But it's not like the typical, like... It's not like their typical, like, insult to your intelligence storybook narrating. It's just kind of a case of where it's almost like a novel, so to speak, where like the thing happens and there's just these key moments that come up in the story, rather than just having it be a whole three-act structure. Although it does follow the three-act structure in the case of how it's written, it's kind of a combination of the three-act structure, but it also has some more episodic elements to it, where there's like little tinier stories within each thing, each with their own build-up and resolution, some more comedic than others. So that's the case. From a technical standpoint, it's a pretty well put together film. The people knew what they were doing. The actors did a pretty good job, especially the child actors, oddly enough, which, again, it always surprised me when child actors do a good job, but I'm guessing with the case of Timothy Green, played by C.J. Adams, his stuff, I mean, towards the end, you got a feel for the kind of performance he was given, but all the other stuff is very, like, short, simple, kind of like a kid. It's kind of like they almost took a kid off the street and just like, hey, guess what? You're gonna be in a movie now. Because that's how his performance kind of felt during the first bits of it, because you didn't really hear him a lot. It was just kind of a hi, bye sort of stuff. But towards the middle and towards the end of the film, you really kind of get to know the character a little bit more. But I guess the best comparison I can think of is with the, like, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory Tim Burton film, where in that film they almost try to make him look like a saint. It's like they took the whole sort of saint-like quality of the child characters, but put it more realistic, because, again, with the traits that they gave the kid in the beginning of the story, they said they didn't want to have him perfect, but he's still kind of like perfect, but they still have like the traits. They gave him like honest to a fault and the whole like love and be loved stuff. The honest to a fault is kind of where they get some of their comedy, is where honest to a fault, but he's not very confrontational with a lot of things. He doesn't get into fights or anything. And again, there's this really funny scene with the soccer team, because one of the things is they want him to score the winning goal, and it's just funny how certain things play out in that scene. But again, overall, I enjoyed this film. It's a nice, heartwarming film. I really wish they released it more during the holiday season instead of the summer movie seasons, because I'm guessing Disney either was too confident or didn't have a lot of confidence in this film to really think about the release dates and how they were going to market it. So, on my personal scale, I'm giving The Odd Life of Timothy Green a 4 out of 5. Like I said, it's a good film. The story, although it has its flaws, it's still pretty good, and it's not as flawed as some of the other stuff I've seen this summer. And the film was also pretty well put together from a technical standpoint. I mean, it's shot well, it's edited well. The music was a little because you can tell the composer was trying too hard with what little they had to work with. But overall, it's a nice film. It's a nice family film. I don't necessarily recommend rushing out to theaters to see this, like, unless, say, you're, like, on, it's kind of a date movie, but not at the same time, since it's more about the parenthood thing. So it's maybe like a date movie if, say, you're engaged to someone or if you're married. It's kind of one of those films that if you kind of have a family or sort of, you can go and see, but it's not really something you need to rush out and see, and not really something you want to see by yourself, says the guy who goes to every movie by himself. So yeah, that's my thoughts on The Odd Life of Timothy Green. I'm going to turn the time over to Romney of the present with his review of ParaNorman. Thanks, Romney of the past. So yeah, this is one of those films I didn't have really high hopes for because personally I think the stop-motion animation market has become a little oversaturated with a lot of people trying to copy Tim Burton or Aaron Ardman. But going into this film, best way I can describe it is that I took a lot of the characterizations you find in some of the more deeper stop-motion films, and then combined it with the same type of air that, say, Monsters vs. Aliens has, where it's like an homage to horror films. And that's kind of the two feels that I got from it. At least that's how it makes you feel at the beginning. Then when you get towards like the second and third acts, it just becomes a very intense story. I mean, for an animated family film, I mean, now, best way to put it, this does have humor to it. I mean, that's a given. And the humor in this, I mean, there's a lot of the typical fare, but it finds a nice balance with some of the usual more crude humor that people like. But then there's also some jokes, there's like even some like subtle sight gags that just make you kind of chuckle a little bit because of the irony. And then there's just some jokes that make you just go, whoa, that they actually made that joke in a kid's film. And it's not something vulgar, it's just, well, it's just something that you know that they took a lot of guts to actually put in, because had this been produced by Disney, they probably would have told them to take it out. Jokes aside, this story actually gets pretty intense for an animated kids movie. I mean, one thing I did not expect is that it actually took a great deal of time really exploring the emotional states of the main character throughout all of this. I mean, instead of just doing the typical, oh, he's an outcast, but he's completely fine, it's just like, oh, he's an outcast, and he suddenly has to do a lot of this stuff on his own. It lets it sink in. It lets you, like, see what's going on. It actually lets it sink in. It lets you actually it gives you a chance to actually feel for the characters instead of most other kids' films that just skip from place to place to place as if people are just doing it for a paycheck. And the whole third act of this movie really was beyond my expectation because, I mean, best way to describe it starts out as kind of the light, peppy, cheery, sort of horror-y inspired animated kids film that you see in the trailer, but then when you get to the third act, you're just like, dang. It gets pretty dark for a good chunk of it. It's not like super like dark that it is off-putting, but it's just, you get so invested and it just takes you to a very dark and interesting place, even though the message itself is very simple. And that's more, I don't know if that's just a credit to the writer or to the way everything is executed, but that's just one thing I liked, is how it starts out nice and cheery, but then it really it takes you for a full ride with its own ups and downs. And there's also some moments in there that are genuinely pretty scary. Again, today's society is fairly jaded when it comes to horror films, so a lot of the more simple things that scared people in the past are more done for the sake of comedy here. But even then, you do sense some intense peril, and the people know that a lot of the adults in the audience are just going to see it more in a comedic light rather than a more serious light. And so, again, it's one of the few family films that actually feels like a family film instead of a kids film. It caters to both adults and kids. That's something I have not seen for a long time. Because the big thing is that a lot of people think, oh, family film, that means it's a kids film, so we've got to all focus on the kiddies over here, and then throw one or two things for the adults that are stuck watching it. But here, it's got stuff for everybody. It's got like the nice little crude, simplistic humor and simplistic stuff for the kids. It's got some subtle humor and some pretty out there jokes that only adults would really get. And it's got some nice middle ground with where it goes with its story, stuff that both the parents and the adults can relate to. So this is definitely a family film in every sense of the word. Now, again, the jokes that are for the adults aren't something that's really bad. You're not gonna get like jokes that are like from stuff like The Hangover or something, but it's definitely more for the older audiences that are watching it with kids. So you can tell that they actually put a lot of work in making sure that it appeals to everyone without... I guess the best way to describe it is that they focused so much on the story to make sure that it was good and engaging in and of itself that it succeeds in appealing to everybody. And so, yeah, this film, the stop motion animation is definitely smoother than a lot of the other stop motion films I've seen come out this year. Because, I mean, I didn't watch the Pirates movie by Aardman Studios because a lot of that stop motion looked really choppy. I don't know if it was because they were doing it at either a higher or lower frame rate, but especially when they were trying to do stuff like that in 3D, it gets very like choppy where the movements are just like it's like the thing is glitching up. Whereas here, the animation is nice and smooth while still keeping that stop motion charm to it. I mean, I know everyone's gonna make the comparison, but best thing I like about this is that it doesn't try to copy Tim Burton. That's the biggest thing I like, because personally, again, Nightmare Before Christmas, classic movie, but Tim Burton's overrated. I'm sorry, people, but that's just the truth. He's an overrated filmmaker, and I liked how this film was trying to be more like the other 3D anime films. It had a very DreamWorks-y feel to it, but definitely in a more lighthearted way. Instead of the mean-spirited parodies like Shrek, it felt more like Monsters vs. Aliens, where it's an homage out of love, instead of trying to copy the whole dark, moody stuff from Tim Burton. And it even shows with the music. The music sounds more like the stuff you'd hear from the old 50s and 60s sci-fi movies for a good chunk of it. And then there's just times where the music, you don't even really notice it because you're just so engaged in the story. I mean, there's some scenes I know that don't really have a lot of music, that it's just the visuals and the sound effects that are in the film. And so, point being, overall, this is an incredible film. It's a very well put together, it's a brilliant animated movie. This is one film that I recommend to everybody. My biggest problem, though, is that I really wish they would release stuff like this around October instead of in August. I mean, what is up with that? Why do people release horror films and stuff in September and August and not, October with a certain little holiday that everyone likes called Halloween? Makes no sense. But again, point being, ParaNorman, awesome movie. I highly recommend it. And so on my personal scale, I'm giving ParaNorman a 5 out of 5. So if you're a fan of stop motion animation, you'll like it because of its smooth animation. If you're a fan of like the spookier stories that aren't like the gore porn that has been coming out in recent years, or all the stupid found footage crap, you'll also enjoy this. And again, this film is just a really good film. It's got everything for every demographic. I mean, it's got, again, jokes for the kids, jokes for the adults, and a nice, engaging story, and some genuinely scary moments to bridge the gap. So, yeah, I cannot recommend this film highly enough. To reestablish Odd Life of Timothy Green, 4 out of 5, ParaNorman, 5 out of 5. Next week is going to be another double review, but this time not of 2 movies. Instead, it's going to be a review of a movie and a game. So, the movie review for next week, Premium Rush. Game review for next week, The Last Story. Yes, I know it came out today, but it's an RPG. Can you seriously review an RPG in a single day and have it come out the day it's released?